Okay, so good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Community Mental Health Drug and Alcohol Research Network's webinar, showcasing your research, good practices for conference and seminar presentations. My name is Katie Sam, and I'm the project coordinator for ComDAN. I'd like to begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians on the lands of which we are all meeting today. I am working on the lands of the Wongal people, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging, and extend that respect to any First Nations people attending today. On this cold June morning, I can't help but reflect on the strength of our ancestors, of our First Nations communities, to survive through the last known ice age over 20,000 years ago. Their enduring spirit is a true testament to the resilience of our traditional custodians. I'd also like to recognise those with lived and living experience of mental health needs and substance use, and their important role in shaping policy and service reform, particularly through research and evaluation. So, thank you very much for joining us today. I'm genuinely excited about this session because I believe it will be incredibly valuable for those of us working in the mental health and alcohol and other drug sectors. As a social worker myself, I feel confident when working one-on-one or in small groups, but when it comes to presenting my work to a broader audience of peers and stakeholders, it can feel quite daunting and outside of the usual scope of my practice. And I would assume that I might not be alone in that feeling. But the work that you're all doing on the ground is so powerful and it deserves to be shared. And who better to tell those stories than the people leading the projects and programs and also those receiving the services. That's why today's session is so important. It's about building your confidence in presenting your findings and making that process feel more accessible and achievable. So before I hand over the reins to the wonderful Dr. Emily Deans to run the session, I encourage you all to please use the chat and Q&A functions throughout the session. Emily is very happy to answer all of your questions, so please don't be shy. We are due to finish at 12 o'clock today, and the webinar is being recorded for you to share with your networks. I believe that is all the housekeeping done. So I now have the pleasure of introducing our fabulous presenter, Dr. Emily Deans. So Emily is an early career researcher who has worked within the gambling and alcohol and other drugs fields for the last 7 years. Emily has worked with nonprofit AOD services to build capacity to conduct research to inform practice and feasible evaluation designs. Emily is passionate about using research as a medium to advocate for the needs of client groups, using focus groups and interviews as a platform to hear others' perspectives and experiences, and to embed these into the design of appropriate health service infrastructure. Thank you so much, Emily, for bringing your expertise to ComDAN today.
Thank you, Katie. Thanks for having me. I was saying to Katie before that I've actually really enjoyed putting this presentation together. So I'm hoping that it's actually, I hope it's engaging and I hope that you guys can take a few things away. Bear with me with IT. It's not my strong point. So we'll see how we go. And sing out, Katie, if my Wi-Fi or volume does something. Cool. Right. So I too just want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that I'm sitting on. So our office is based in MacArthur Square. So I want to pay respects to the Darawal people. Sovereignty was never ceded, and it's a real privilege to be able to be living and working on the lands of the Darawal people. I always like to do a little bit of a snippet from our workshop artworks that are done by young people in the local region, as well, obviously, the amazing Danielle Mate, who's a local Aboriginal artist in our region. So you can see there the school mural that they did as part of one of our Archucation projects. Okay, well, all right. So before I get into my 4 tips, and I've limited it to 4 tips today, um, about how we can really engage our audience as well, and showcase our research well. Before I do that, I do want to spend a bit of time orienting to where I am, what I do, the different organisations that I work for, and I guess the different stakeholders that I come across in my 2 different roles. Because I do think we all work in different spaces, we come from different places, we sometimes have different language to express the way we might be feeling. Different sectors work in different ways. So I do think, and feel free to disagree, but I do think we are sometimes shaped by the systems that we're trained in and the work that we do. And I think this has implications for how we actually engage and relay research to stakeholder groups, different stakeholder groups with different backgrounds, different interests. It's something that I think I've had to think very deliberately about, having worked at Youth Solutions, which is a small community organisation, as well as NDARC. So I'll just step through that so you can get a little bit of a background as to who I am and what I do. So, Youth Solutions. We are a youth drug and alcohol harm prevention and health promotion charity. We work with young people 12 to 25 years and the broader community across the Macarthur and Wingecarribee regions. We're out and about. So our stakeholders are community members, corporate sponsors, obviously being a non-profit, generating funding to do the awesome work that we do. Lots of stakeholder groups that are directly supporting young people in the community. So it might be sports coaches, teachers, educators, youth workers. So a lot of sort of sector involvement too with the AOD sector and mental health sectors. So that's kind of, I guess, the stakeholders that sit around that particular job. And in my role at Youth Solutions, I head up the research arm. And I am a qualitative researcher by trade, so it really is about trying to embed young people's perspectives into the design and the delivery of our work at Youth Solutions. So that's kind of one flavour and one area in which I'm working. The other area is a little bit more of a formal research institution. It's very much an academic setting, working for the National Drug and Alcohol Research Centre, which is obviously based out of University of New South Wales, and is at the forefront of national and international evidence-based responses to the health challenges related to AOD. So in my role there, I do have the privilege of working with community organisations in supporting them to do evaluations that can be published to, I guess, broaden the literature about evidence-based programs. So I definitely have stakeholder groups that have a special place in my heart in terms of service providers and those working on the front line, but it's a different setting. And I think when you're sort of working across 2 or straddling 2 different kind of work environments, it becomes very clear that yes, the way that we communicate in one sector may be very different to another. Researchers also have a lot of different jargon potentially that they might use, which doesn't always make them accessible to the community and I guess the young people even that we're working with. So I've learned a lot about how I, coming from a research background, can adapt and change and make sure that I'm actually making sense to people who my stakeholders. So hopefully that makes sense. I did just want to give that background to start off with. Okay, so now we're on to my 4 tips, and these have really just come from my learnings over the past 7 years, working both in the community services sector, but also a bit more of a traditional academic researcher role. Okay, so first and foremost, and it seems very simple, and I will say that a lot of my take-homes today will be very simple, but knowing your audience is absolutely essential. The 3 questions that I really like to ask myself before I'm asked to present is who's in the room with you? Why are they here? And what do you think that they care about? And I think if we spend the time actually reflecting, even doing some brainstorming around these 3 questions, early on, before you're drafting up your slides, you're more likely to craft a message, I think, that actually resonates with the people who are in the room. So obviously the breadth of different stakeholders that go to conferences is quite vast. But if you spend a little bit of time looking at, who you think the main stakeholder groups would be, even do a little bit of a Google search on who you think other speakers who might be in the room who are presenting at the same time, really starting to understand and mapping out who your audience is. And I love that little infographic because, you might have some awesome stuff to say and you think it's awesome. But if, the stakeholders in the room don't necessarily share your enthusiasm for all aspects of your research, you really need to understand what you can pitch that would be of interest to them so that you can relay your research findings really well. Okay, I love my, images. So crafting a distinct storyline is my second take home. And I think when we present research findings, it is our job to take, our research aims, our research questions, our methodology and our approach, the findings that we've come up with, and I guess the implications. And we need to turn all of that research jargon into something that's actually digestible for our audience, and we need to bring them along a journey. Hence the hiking, picture. I think there's many opportunities for us to, steer off into other areas on a journey, but I think it's our jobs as presenters to make sure that we guide and keep people on a sort of direct and a distinct storyline so that, they're actually digesting and understanding the research findings and the implications of our research findings. I think that's a responsibility of the presenter to do that. We don't want to make our audience have to work really hard to try to understand the story. And I think it's really important to remember as researchers, we often present on data or findings that we are intimately familiar with, as well as on topics and methodology that we've probably spent a lot of time reading up about, talking to our colleagues about, but the people in the room that we're presenting to potentially have not. So it's our job to actually package it very well for others. And if we don't do that, I think we've really missed an opportunity to share and disseminate our findings really well. So taking the jargon, taking the systems that we're working with and the language that we use and really trying to simplify it and bring others along on the journey. It's communication, I think, 101. Awesome quote. I think my PhD supervisor very early on in my career, would always say this: if you can't explain it simply and if you can't break it down and put together a nice story, you don't understand it well enough. And if you don't understand it well enough, you're probably not going to be able to relay it well to those who are in the room with you. So I actually have a nice printout of Albert and this particular quote on my desk at home. We're not trying to come across fancy and technical. We are trying to basically break it down and share some significant findings related to our research. So we want to do that simply, and we want to bring everyone on the journey. Okay. So this is just an example. I'm enthusiastic about both these images, but I can absolutely understand that, a nice, dense publication, is, some people's cup of tea. I can also appreciate and comprehend that, words and long sentences and academic literature isn't other people's cup of tea. So this is more around, how you're actually communicating your research findings, thinking about infographics that you can use, obviously less text is better. And this, I think, goes beyond even just presenting your research within a seminar or a conference. If you're presenting your research findings through LinkedIn, for example, or on your socials, having something that's actually going to be digestible for community members who may not have the time to sit down and read your journal article that's beautifully published, but not always accessible for people that might not necessarily have that research background. So just having a little bit of a deliberate think about how we actually present and break down the key findings of your research and how you can, yeah, I guess it's an example of how we can simplify and use infographics that are going to resonate with a broader audience than using heavy text. Okay, and these tips and tricks all relate to how we're crafting a distinct storyline and we're keeping people on that journey with us. All right, so a point about problematic colour combinations, and I have to say I went down a little bit of a rabbit warren hole for this particular slide because I actually learnt a lot, and that's why I was sort of saying before to Katie when we were testing tech that I actually really enjoyed putting together this presentation because I learnt a lot about things that I potentially, hadn't known. So colour does play a really important role in guiding the viewer's eyes. And this also includes being aware of problematic colour combinations. And if we use accessible designs and accessible colours, it actually allows us to reach a wider audience and it's more inclusive of those who may have actually impaired colour vision. So what are accessible colours? Accessible colours are colour combinations that have high contrast to ensure layered elements on a page and distinguishable for those who are actually visually impaired or deficient in colour vision. So those who potentially have colour blindness, this is stuff that we need to think about when we're putting together presentations for a group, for large groups of people. So the 3 colour combinations that we do want to avoid are on the screen: the red and the green, the orange and the blue, and the red and the blue. And I have to say, if this is something that you think, oh, that's interesting, do some research, get online. There's actually some apps that you can download that actually help you put together some really awesome colour combinations for your presentations that are actually going to be more inclusive of those that might have limited colour vision. So just a point about, if you've got problematic colours in your slides, that's just another distraction for someone in straying off the storyline and the path that you're trying to guide. All right, next take home. Finish with clear implications. So I got asked, and it was a little bit abrupt, I remember, early on in my career when I'm talking about we've done this research and, look at all the things that we've done. I remember one of my supervisors just said to me, yeah, okay, so what? So what, Em? And it's actually helped me a lot to actually really sit and think about, yeah, okay, so what? You've done this amazing research. You've spent a lot of time. You've connected with your different participants, whatever you might be doing. But if you can't have sort of a clear breakdown of the clear implications of your research and actually spell that out for, the participants who are in your seminar or in your session, again, you've lost an opportunity. So why are the findings important? You really need to sort of think about that. What are the key implications for policy, the implications for practice? It might even be the implications for advocacy. So it's obviously going to depend on the context and the audience that you're presenting to. So that sort of goes back to the take-home message from number 1. Knowing your audience can really shape how you actually draft up your implications. So strong presenters can really relay quite deliberately what the take-home messages are, and it's worth spending time critically thinking about the so what. I think when I put together a presentation, not only are you crafting that distinct storyline, but you're spending a lot of time at the end thinking about, okay, what are your take-home messages? What are the clear implications? And presenting them in a digestible way for your audience. We don't want to leave audiences feeling confused. We don't want to leave audiences feeling frustrated. So I'm sure we are all have all been in presentations or seminars where it can be frustrating if it's not clear, if the implications of the research are vague or jargony. It can be frustrating for audiences. And I think we can minimise the chances of this if we work to really understand the key take-homes of our research and having it crystal clear in our heads prior to delivering on that. Again, another missed opportunity if we don't spend that time really unpacking what the key implications are. So I've given an example, and feel free to critique it. You can tell, I think Katie's monitoring the chat, but I'd love your thoughts on whether you think this isn't clear and accessible. Stick with me here, because obviously this is a slide taken from a research project that I haven't actually presented on to you guys. But I will sort of run through the main sort of findings of this particular research study and how I've kind of come up with the so what. Okay, so stick with me. So there are three implications for this particular research, which related to health promotion and health literacy practice. It was a research study that we conducted with young people who were justice involved young people about basically their thoughts around alcohol and other drug education and what they knew about drug and alcohol education, what their understandings around harm reduction, all that kind of stuff. And it was a qualitative study where basically we went in to different justice settings in New South Wales, and we just had a chat. So we did focus groups, I think all up we did 9, and we just had a chat with young people about these particular topics. Okay, so the first implication, or the first take home for that particular research, was that the access to alcohol and other drug education is actually inequitable. So a lot of the young people that we spoke to actually couldn't relay harm reduction education or harm reduction strategies to us, despite them using, numerous drugs. So they also spoke to us about how, potentially their alcohol and other drug education doesn't necessarily flow through the channels where young people might be outside of a school system, if that makes sense. So the access to that actual resource, as resource being AOD education, is not fair. It's not a level playing field, I guess. Lots of focus within the school setting around AOD education, but how do we then make that sort of flow into other areas where young people, and potentially vulnerable young people, are living and recreating? Okay, so that was the first sort of take home. The second take home of this particular research study was that early intervention and harm reduction work absolutely benefits from incorporating lived experiences and thinking about how to link young people who may have lived experience into the systems where they can positively influence change. So this came about because the young people said, it gives them hope if they can have someone who's speaking from experience around their AOD struggles. And I should say that all of the participants in this study were dealing with alcohol and other drug issues as well. So for them, having that lived experience perspective actually facilitated a sense of rapport. It also helped them think, there's hope for me, because here's a lived experience advocate and they've gone through the other side of treatment, and here they are. So that was something that they really cared about. So the implication is it matters. It matters, and we need to work hard to embed those lived experiences within the AOD, early intervention and harm reduction space. Third implication, which, stick with me here, guys, relates to the motivations and the perceptions of individuals. So if we focus only on individuals' behaviours around alcohol and other drugs, and disregard, I guess, the social settings, the environments, the context, I guess, of which young people might be using substances, we risk widening the equity gap between privileged, well-resourced populations and marginalised groups. So the third implication that we kind of draw out is we're advocating for the vulnerable consumer. And what I mean by that is a consumer that potentially has limited resources to be able to respond to trauma or mental illness in a way that I guess society deems acceptable. And instead, they might be using the AOD kind of pathway to cope and to numb. So the implication is we need to work as a sector, early intervention and in health promotion and in treatment, to see an end to the stigma. We need to educate others about the complexities of the drug use or of drug use more broadly, so that we can yeah, be advocates, I guess, for the young people who find themselves involved in the justice system and dealing with alcohol and other drug issues. So that I'm hoping gives a good example of, three key take homes related to that particular research study that I hope are digestible for people. Another tip and trick is I would always chuck a QR code. If there is people in the room that love to read a journal article or a publication, they can absolutely just get their phones out, and that will take them to the published paper, which obviously then they have more time to sit and think and read through your findings. And you can just do that on Canva. So free accounts, create your QR code, and then dump your link. So again, there's lots of different apps out there that can make presenting easy. I'm hoping that wasn't confusing, because then that'll go against the whole presentation. Okay, my fourth take-home message is actually being yourself. And I'd love to hear some reflections in the chat. Hopefully, Katie, there's some questions in there about, some of the presentations that you've really kind of resonated with, and the people who are behind those presentations. I think that's something that's worth just sitting and thinking about. Who do you really, in the past, who have you been in a room with, who's presented to you that you think, oh yeah, I'm in this, I'm on the journey, I'm listening, I'm learning, and yeah, you've built rapport, I guess, or had a connection with the presenter. So we do know that research exists around this stuff. So there is considerable evidence that documents the positive outcomes that are associated with authentic self-expression. And that does include a whole heap of different things. So the way we dress, the language we use, our expressions in our body language, all come into play when we're being ourselves. So something to think deliberately about. And yeah, I encourage you guys to dump some questions or dump some reflections in the chat, and we can come back to that, because I'd love to hear from you guys at the end about what's really resonated with you about a particular presenter that you've been in the room with. Okay. Key implications, my key take homes. Just going to summarize them so that it's clear in our heads. One, knowing your audience, knowing who's in the room, doing a little bit of a background check on everyone, and really understanding what you think that they might care about, so that you can actually build rapport, build that connection, and bring them along on the journey. Second take home tip is all around crafting a distinct storyline. And I think in the world of research, and in the world of a lot of potentially technical jargon, technical methodology, theory, all these sorts of things, it is our job to work very hard to create that distinct storyline, and bring people along the journey. Third take home, finish presentations with very clear implications. Ask yourself, yeah, so what? Why does this matter? Why does it matter for practice? Why does it matter for policy? Why does it matter for community? And that will be guided too by the audience that you're presenting to. So for example, if you're presenting to an audience of policy makers, your clear implications, and you're wanting to get a little bit more funding to generate some more research, you will shift and adapt the way you present your implications, depending on who's in the room, which are kind of, goes hand in hand with knowing your audience. Fourth, be yourself. I think for me, if I was to reflect, the presentations that I've really loved are people who actually don't pretend to know everything, because we can't know everything. The people who won't fudge questions, for example. If you get a really hard question and you can't answer it, be authentic and say, look, that's a great question. I don't think I can answer that. But what I would love to do is, read up on that, and I'll get your contact details afterwards, and we can continue that conversation. So sometimes that is hard to do when you're put on the spot and you're trying to sort of make something up to make it sound like you know what you're doing. But I think sometimes that can come across not as authentic. So be yourself. We know that can help with building rapport and connection with your audiences. So I've sped through my 4 take homes and my presentation, but I'm hoping, Katie, that there are some questions or some, conversations that we can have based on these 4 tips.
Thank you so much, Emily. That was so interesting. And look, we haven't had any questions yet, so I will highly encourage everyone to please take the time and use Emily's expertise while she's here. Chloe has just popped in the chat. Presenters who are clearly passionate about their work are always the most compelling and engaging. And I think that is absolutely right. And when you were saying who's someone who stands out to you, immediately I thought of your colleague, is it Georgie? And
Georgie.
yes,
Yeah.
and I think the first time I saw him speak, he sang The Lion King, and it was beautiful. And he helped lift the mood at like that 3 o'clock conference slump that we often experience. And then spoke about cultural humility in like a really beautiful and engaging and very authentic way. I think that there was no denying that he was being his true self in that space, and that
Yeah.
that stands out to me. And I think it sticks with you. I think it sticks with you more than the people who are just reading off their notes and just like keeping things really plain and simple. And sometimes that works for some people, but yeah, the Lion King singing has stuck out to me for a few years. So
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. Georgie, yeah, I'm pretty sure Georgie has a bit of a drama background, which I have to say is very helpful when you're presenting in
Yes.
environments. If you can be animated, you can be passionate, you can create energy, bring energy to your presentation, that's infectious, and your audience can sometimes hook into that. And if you're, as it was a Chloe, I think, put as Chloe said, if they're passionate, then, hopefully you can feed off that energy and see why it matters. If someone's really passionate about something. Yeah, there's a lot of literature out there too around tone, tone of voice and the levels at which we use. But that stuff, you can just do some Googling, guys, and have a think about how we use our tone and how we use our voice as well. And that comes into sort of that, a drama kind of thing, how we present ourselves and how we actually facilitate, I guess, discussions among an audience. Yeah.
And I think that Carmen's just said in the chat as well that being genuine with your passion and authenticity comes across the whole space and like your body lights up. And I think that is so true. And I think that if we want people to be excited about the work that we're presenting, like we have to show that we're excited about it too. And I think that also comes with your take home message about really highlighting what is the so what factor and the impact, the potential impacts of the work that you've done. And while things might be about like you might be evaluating your service, but then saying what could this like be implications for other AOD or mental health organizations as well? What learnings can you bring into your practice too? So having that maybe wider lens of thinking and reflecting on the work that you do and translating that into presentations, I think is a great way of conveying that excitement of yeah, and showcasing the great work that everyone's doing as well.
Mm. And I think I was just going to say, I think I've been challenged by my colleagues at Youth Solutions, for example, who have, your social work backgrounds, who potentially haven't been brought up in a research system. And they say, Em, what are you talking about? Em, well, you don't have research heads. Can you break that down? And I think over the last 7 years, I've thought very deliberately and still learning how to do that better because we do come from different worlds. Just the world, even the world views, the language, the different ways of working are very, very stark, I think, when you're actually working into or you're straddling the community services sector and the research world. It's like, oh my gosh, how do we bridge that gap? between these two worlds that are actually very, very different, but can complement and
Mm,
support one another. Yeah.
absolutely. And Kristen's just said empathy in a person who is accessible in terms of the audience feeling brave to ask a question. I think that's a great point. Like, I know it can take me quite a few moments to feel comfortable enough to ask a question, then but then you start to think, if I'm thinking this, there might be one or two other people that might be thinking this too. And but it is a really brave thing to be an audience member and ask a question in a presentation as well, and to feel confident to do that and have that reflected and validated. I think in the moment it might be really helpful and show that you understand that this is maybe a weird dynamic of presenting at a conference as well. There is a bit of a power dynamic there, and helping kind of reduce that where possible, I think is also an important thing to consider as well.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. And I do think it goes back to, I'll just go back through my slides. I think it does go back to this as well. Like if you're coming across as if you're trying to trick your audience or you're trying to sound very technical, your agenda is presenting someone who might, know a lot of stuff about a lot of things. That's not helpful for creating a space where everyone feels as if they're on a level playing field and can actually say, hey, I've got a query about this. You can automatically, very quickly, get people offside if you, if you're too jargony and too, trying to, I guess, come across as if you're tricking your audience or trying to, try too hard, maybe. I don't know. I think it's really important to try and think simply about this stuff, and just to validate that people have different skill sets and different ways of learning and different ways of presenting language, all that kind of stuff. It doesn't mean that others are better or worse. It means that it's different, and it's our job to make it more accessible and digestible for the audiences that are in the room. Yeah.
You've got some really nice feedback from Kristen as well, that your way of presenting is very warm and great. So that's must be a relief. I'm curious, Emily, can you remember the first time you had to present at a conference, and any big learnings that you had from it, or any kind of
Yes.
stark memories?
Yes. Well, I do. That's very kind, Kristen. Thank you. I do think it's the low tones. Sometimes I feel that can the warmness comes from a bit of a lower. I don't know. That's my theory anyway. Look, to be honest, I actually, and this might surprise, but I actually get very nervous when I'm presenting at conferences. I get very nervous. I do the shakes. I do get the shakes. I sometimes have to do some mindfulness in the toilet. The breathing, the breath work. I don't enjoy it. Is what I'm getting across. So it always feels like a little bit of a task to get up in front of people. I don't know whether anyone really does enjoy it. I don't know. Maybe there are some people that do. But yeah, I remember the first time as a PhD student, you're thrown in. I remember when I was doing my PhD, conference after conference, and you just had to get used to it. You just had to get up and do it. And I do think the more you do it, the better you get at feeling okay with being uncomfortable. And you get to know the particular strategies that help you deal with it a bit better. I remember I had a supervisor who actually would take her shoes off and ground herself on the floor. For me, I will sometimes go quick, so it's about deliberately slowing down, counting to 1, 2, 3 before you go to the next slide. So things like that, you get to know what you might not necessarily do as well, and then you can come up with strategies to help do it better. But yeah, I don't love it. I find it challenging and I find it uncomfortable, which I don't know. Question for anyone is: does anyone love presenting? I don't know. Is there people out there that love it? I'd
That's
love to hear
true.
from you.
Unless you've got that drama background, maybe it becomes a bit more of a chore. But I'm curious, Corin has asked, do you find it easier to present online rather than face to face?
That's a great question, Corin. And I have to say, I absolutely love presenting in person over an online situation. I think for a number of reasons. First reason is I'm not tech savvy. I try my best, but I do find, you've got screens here, cameras there, and Wi-Fi, dodgy Wi-Fi. And so there are, I guess, things that you might not necessarily be able to mitigate for if things do go wrong. And that can be stressful. Uh, but you also don't get the audience interaction as much, I think, and you can't really tell. For example, let's use this as an example. I don't see any of any of you guys, so I don't even know your facial expressions, how I think you're receiving the presentation. You're not in the room with me. I can't read your body language. So I think, yeah, for me, I personally prefer the presentation in person, being able to do that and be in the room with people. But I can absolutely appreciate that there are benefits to be able to just jump on a lunchtime webinar and do it online, to save everyone's time. Pros and cons to both. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think there is definitely pros and cons, but so much more considerations around the tech side of things. And yeah, I think also it can be quite confronting seeing yourself presenting rather than just having the perception of other people looking at you. That's daunting enough, but then when there's a camera there, that can feel quite, yeah,
Yeah.
confronting, I think, for a lot of people,
Yeah,
particularly in
definitely.
this sector. I think we're not too flashy, and so it's a new phenomenon for a lot of us. Um, so yeah, I think you've raised some great points. I'm curious what like I shared about Georgie's singing. What other really creative ways have you seen presenting done that has stuck with you, and maybe creative ways of showing outcomes and potential impacts of work?
Yeah, good question, Katie. There's probably a few folk that have went to the NADA conference, in this session, and I really love. There was one presenter in particular that actually got people to do some physical sort of actions. Like some clapping, some moving around. I can appreciate that it might not be everyone's cup of tea, but it really did bring a bit of energy to the room. So with the work that Youth Solutions does, for example, we're facilitating workshops with young people every day, and we can read the room when young people are not in it, not feeling a little bit low and the energy's dropped. What we need to do is we need to energize that space. We need to come in and do some energizers, and I think that that's the way that particular presenter handled that, in that he brought a lot of energy through sort of physical, a bit dramery, a bit going back to those sort of drama techniques. But yeah, it was left of field and a bit unexpected, but it did boosted the mood and created the energy and the vibe in the room quite quickly. So that was really interesting. I always love people who move around, but again, that's not everyone's cup of tea either. Um, I'm a big sort of lots of expression, hand movements. I find I connect with that better. Um, and yeah, just the tone, just going back to the tone and the levels at which you're working with. I think, monotone presentations for me personally, I clock off pretty quickly. And I think it does go back to those points around potentially there's not a lot of energy or passion, potentially. Or I'm not, maybe not an awareness around, the tones around and how we can utilize the different sort of levels that we speak at. Yeah. Um, I was also thinking too, Katie, another thing, just getting back to like what I struggle with and what I really need to work at is generating volume. So I'm fine if I've got a microphone to work with, but you don't always have a microphone to work with. And that's something that I've had to sort of train and work hard at, because I don't feel as if I have a booming voice, and I need to really facilitate sort of think about the back of the room. Sometimes I feel like I'm almost yelling, but we need to sort of have a think about that's a weakness for me. So what can I do to basically project my voice over the audience so the people in the back row can hear what I'm saying.
Mm.
So I think, yeah, the more that you do that stuff, the more you pick up on stuff that you struggle with, and then you can come up with tips and strategies to support yourself when you're doing it.
Mm. Mm. It's interesting. There's so much like somatic things that you need to really consider, I guess, when you're like, it's not just about knowing the content, feeling excited about the content, like getting through the nerve. You're also having to think about how you project, how you enunciate. Like it's it's a skill, it's a real skill, and I think that that's why it's an important conversation to have because I think a lot of people are just thrown in the deep end to represent their organization or the project that they've worked on and aren't kind of going, but how the heck do I actually do this thing and what and really think about all these considerations and know that everyone's actually thinking about them. It's not just you and your potential anxious feelings about public speaking. It's a very kind of shared experience for everyone, I think. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
what do you think, like, you've seen, you were kind of sharing around visual representations and some visual storytelling. Like, have you got any other examples of other maybe creative ways in storytelling that has been I don't know, impactful that you've seen?
Yeah, it's a good question. Absolutely. Like there are definitely examples where, for me, for example, I love a panel
Mm,
discussion. I love when there's actually really sort of authentic questions about stuff. You know, you can think outside the box and how you actually relay the findings of research, I think. So being creative and not necessarily sticking to perhaps what the system tells you should be doing, you know, getting up and doing it one way. But I really love sort of the generating discussion, not only maybe with a co-facilitator, but with your audience as well.
mm,
Um, Again, trying to bring everyone on that journey, I think giving people place to contribute. So I've definitely been in presentations where people have, you know, embedded some of the tech stuff, the Mentimeters, the Slido. Again, not everyone's cup of tea. They might prefer to actually, you know, communicate and have discussions in real life in real time. But I have seen that, you know, being utilised really well. And it does give people an opportunity to be able to contribute anonymously. You know, it can be daunting, like you were saying before, Katie. You know, you've got a whole room full of people who you're probably not aware of their backgrounds or, you know, who they are and what they do, if you're in the audience kind of thing. Um, and, you know, getting up to ask a question can sometimes be like, oh, you know, what if people think this is a dumb question or this isn't my field of work? And it might seem really simple and I won't ask my question. So
mm,
I think sometimes having those options, you know, the option to actually ask questions anonymously, I think is really important because I absolutely have resonated with that at times when it could be a completely different research topic, a completely different field of work.
mm,
Oh, gee, I'm not all over this and I don't know. I don't know anything about this topic. How
mm.
can I ask my question in a
Yeah.
way that I feel comfortable with doing? So I think having options for people is important. Yeah, and just being inclusive in that as well, like being aware that, yeah, there are different people in the room from different backgrounds that might resonate in different ways.
Mm,
Yeah. I
mm.
don't know whether I answered your question, Katie.
No, it's really helpful. And I think what I could hear as well, I think the idea of using things like Mentimeter and Slido, I think it can even just be a way of almost establishing a feeling of safety in the room. Like if you're kind of doing it early on and they're doing these things, and then you're seeing that everyone in the room is like got shared values or shared thoughts as you when they're kind of coming up with all the different results. That's a way of kind of helping establish that it's a safe space. And then people might be more inclined to ask a question in person after that as well. So, as well as kind of those accessibility and inclusivity considerations as well.
Mm.
So yeah, I think that's a really interesting point as well.
Yeah, I'll give you a really nice example. I was asked to present at it was kind of like a big cross sector mental health AOD round table, bringing people from different sectors together to discuss and brainstorm. And I knew that there were going to be people in different spaces. I knew because the topic that I got asked to present on was vaping. And I knew that there's controversy out there. I know that there are people that sit in different spaces in terms of harm min, prevention, what do we, yeah. So different kind of angles that they might take. And I know that there's been it's a contentious hot topic. So I had to really think about, okay, so I'm presenting to this group of sector workers that come from different spaces and places. And I'm privileged to know some of them very well. And I've had those conversations on the sideline about, well, what do you think? And I think I thought very hard about, okay, how do I create a sense of cohesion and a sense of safety for the audience to be able to actually ask their questions, share their points about certain content that I was presenting on in a way that was safe for them and that they felt okay doing. So I think it was what I did use Menti for this, and I did actually. I started by I think I used a Gandhi quote around, we all had something about we can have different opinions, but it's important for us to respect different opinions. So I did preface it as, we're gonna have a look at the different opinions in the room. We're gonna have a little session where I want you guys to tell me where you sit in terms of, are you all gung ho in terms of vapes and harm reduction and all that kind of stuff, smoking cessation, or are you more on this continuum? So I actually put it out to the audience and said, hey, we're all going to have different opinions. Give me your opinions. I really want to hear them. But I obviously preface that with, you can have different opinions. That's absolutely fine. But we always respect other people's opinions and create space to have conversations about these things because that's how we get better as a sector. So I think that was a good use. I'm just reflecting that particular Mentimeter question was inviting people's perspectives in a way that, to create safety in a group of audiences that have different viewpoints.
Absolutely. And I think like Corin's just touched on that it can, like using those tools can trivialize like issues in consultation. And so I think it's about kind of using it in a way that marries kind of using it to help delve deeper into a topic rather than just saying, well, 50% of the room thinks this and 50%, so that's then all we're going to take away from it. I think that it's like, going hand in hand to say, this is really interesting, let's have a conversation about that, or that's a really interesting point that's being brought up there. Is anyone comfortable to share what that means for them? I think
that's interesting. I think being a qual researcher, I think my preference is always, give me a comment, give me give me a sentence to work with. There's always, you want to generate those open-ended kind of opportunities for people to actually share what they think rather than your pre-labeled or predetermined categories for them to think in, if that makes sense. So really thinking about how you ask your audience to engage with your content, and thinking about those open-ended opportunities as well.
And I think it helps again remove that power dynamic and show that this is a room of people who are experts in whatever work that they're doing. And we want to kind of collaborate to then help inform all of our work moving forward. So rather than just saying, this is the work that we've done and it's excellent and that's all we're going to hear about it. I think that like there's a good opportunity to facilitate that shared learning experience as well in presentations. So I think there's sorry, go.
No, I was just thinking, Katie, that sometimes I think it's helpful for you to share your presentation or with a colleague or with someone who's maybe not within your field kind of thing. Does this actually make sense to you? Because you learn very quickly whether there's certain things on your slides that are confusing or distracting, Or, I think it, yeah, again goes back to if it's not simple, if you can't understand it and explain it simply, then that comes through, I think, in your presentation. So sometimes if you're getting a second eye over it, someone who's from a completely different field or different background, a friend, a mate, whoever it might be, that's a good strategy, I think, in trying to actually ascertain whether you have crafted a good storyline, whether you've got clear implications, whether you've got anything wrong with your formatting that can be distracting for audiences and things like that.
Mm. And the point about the problematic colors was so interesting. And I'm concerned that Comdan's colors are orange and blue. We need to cancel Comdan and Christmas, apparently, with it being red and green as well. So we've got
Yes,
big
well,
things to take on moving forward. Um, well, look,
yeah.
we're at time, Em. So I just want to thank you so much. I think this was a really great presentation. It was really nice to have a more in-depth conversation with you as well about the learnings and applying them across different contexts. And thank you everyone for attending today. And a short survey will pop up on your screen when you exit the Zoom, and we would really appreciate your support for the growth and development of Comdan. And Emily is a big data nerd and would love to see your feedback as well. So, look, thank you so much, everyone, and we hope to see you soon at another Comdan event. Have a lovely day. Thanks, Emily.